Weiss is the author of To the Tune of a Welcoming God, lyrical reflections on sexuality, spirituality, and the wideness of God's welcome. He and Margaret have a blended family of 5 children, 5 grandchildren, a pair of international high school students, and assorted animals that approximate a peaceable kingdom. Please welcome David R. Weiss.
Thank you. All right, the piece that I'm going to read is in the almanac on page 180, if you have an almanac and you want to open it up. And I mention that specifically because it has beautiful artwork that goes with it. The piece is titled The Fantastic Four. It's a reflection about my experience as an election judge. And I want to acknowledge that one of the other Fantastic Four is here tonight. Nancy is in the back corner, and she came to hear this piece. Fantastic Four. Okay, I am not a superhero, but I will lay claim to something more than mere delusions of grandeur. Like the superheroes of our imagination, I am an otherwise ordinary-looking individual. And like them, on occasion, I manifest extraordinary powers to preserve our freedom and democracy. So it was that 4 of us circled ourselves in the early dawn at the edge of an empty St. Paul parking lot on a Tuesday morning in August. The gentle breeze and clear skies seemed innocuous, but the stillness might have signaled to an attentive onlooker that something unusual, something extraordinary was about to happen. And then it did. Our leader, her red hair beckoning flames in the morning sun, spoke first, and her words called the rest of our voices forth into an incantation fit for flying capes and masked crusaders. I solemnly swear that I will perform the duties of election judge according to the law and the best of my ability, and will diligently endeavor to prevent fraud, deceit, and abuse in conducting this election. I will perform my duties in a fair and impartial manner, and not attempt to create an advantage for my party or any candidate. Oh, you say. No, not oh. In the vivid vocabulary of Vice President Joe Biden, this is a big effing deal. I mean, 4 of us, complete strangers, meet in an empty school parking lot at 6 a.m. and 30 minutes later engage ourselves in a ritual recitation that transforms us from mere neighbors into stewards of democracy. With these words, we become keepers of an electoral process for which many around the globe still yearn. True, mostly we just push papers, register new voters, collect signatures in the registration roster, hand out receipts at one table, and then collect them at the very next table in exchange for a ballot, and see to it that the ballots, duly marked, make their way into the big black box that today becomes the voice of our combined citizenship. So capes, tights, and masks would probably be overkill. But on this day, in the humble and sporadic, it was a primary election after all, sporadic procession of citizens who cast their votes, the highest ideals of our democracy are being practiced, setting campaign rhetoric aside, but with competing visions of the common good still claiming our silent allegiances. On this day, we do something all too uncommon on our planet. We settle our differences peacefully. And on this day, as the sun rises, a whole assortment of us step out of our otherwise ordinary lives to become election judges for a day. If superhero is an overstatement, it is only just barely so. After all, in a democracy, the real superpower is helping to ensure that every vote, every voice is heard. I brought one more piece to read. It's actually what I submitted and which appeared in last year's St. Paul Almanac. It's kind of a fun piece. This one is titled, Worms Eat My Garbage, a St. Paul love story. You look like yesterday. Margaret set her crossword aside and smiled warmly from the bench outside Northwestern Hall at Luther Seminary. It was Friday afternoon, and I just finished a long day of academic jargon at a religion conference. Intriguing ideas, to be sure, but this is what I'd been waiting for. Yesterday was more than 15 years ago. Back in 1980, at Wartburg College in Iowa, we had dated for a year. We were pretty serious, but for a host of reasons, things didn't work out. So we went our separate ways, married other people, had kids, exchanged long handwritten letters at Christmas and birth announcements in between, and then we lost touch. When I greeted her that Friday in April 1999, it had been 15 years since we'd seen each other, and 10 years since our last letters. In that decade of silence, we'd both experienced painful divorces. Margaret wound up in St. Paul, while I'd landed back in Iowa, teaching at Luther College in Decorah. That spring, I tracked her down by internet, called her up, and hung up before she answered. 10 years is a long stretch of silence to break, especially for an introvert. But I dialed again, we did speak, and 3 weeks later, there we were. Setting out from Decorah for St. Paul that morning, I knew I'd be at the conference all day, and that Margaret would be waiting for me at the end of the day. I also knew that I had once loved her deeply, and that I had no business allowing what-if scenarios to run rampant through my mind while I drove north on Highway 52. We hadn't seen each other in 15 years, hadn't written in a decade. I didn't even know if she was dating anyone. And yet, what if? Somewhere between Chatfield and Rochester, it hit me. If it looks like things are going to get serious, you'd better clear the worms before you find yourself in another relationship where they're off limits. You see, in my last marriage, I'd spent years trying to persuade my wife about the merits of worm composting. I'm no ecologist. I just take my planet seriously, and I thought feeding our kitchen waste to a bin of worms sounded cool. She did not, at all. That marriage had problems far bigger than the worm impasse, but it was worms that interrupted my what-if musings along Highway 52. Hours later, Margaret's smile pushed the little red wrigglers out of mind. She fed me a delicious meal, and we shared the sort of conversation that left both of us wondering if we'd merely imagined all those silent years. Afterwards, I retreated to the living room and browsed her bookshelves while waiting for her to join me. That's when the epiphany happened. Second shelf down, smack in the middle, Worms Eat My Garbage by Mary Applehoff. I kid you not. The very book that came with the worm compost kit that had caught my eye years earlier. I suspect that many of our lives contain nudges from the universe about which path we ought to take. That day, the universe used worms to tell me Margaret was my path. We began dating again that summer and courted for 2 years, allowing ourselves and our children time to get acquainted across the 150 miles between Decorah and St. Paul. We married in 2001, and that Christmas, Margaret and all the kids got me a worm bin. Another decade has passed, this one in joy, and both our marriage and the worms continue to thrive right here in St. Paul. Thank you, and I should acknowledge Margaret is in the back corner over here.